The port of Mombasa is there because Mombasa has a natural harbor. Now, the harbor is a natural resource of the people of Mombasa. Now, what we're doing is creating a public monopoly. You know, people are being coerced to put their cargo on the SGR. So we are moving the port inland. So the harbor is in Mombasa. That's a natural waterway that ships use. But the people of Mombasa will no longer benefit from it because all the port logistics will now be moved inland. Initially to the ICD in Nairobi, but we also hear that it may be moved to Naivasha. Okay. I don't know why. So that's a huge, so you're moving jobs and the economy of Mombasa, which is in many ways a marginalized region in some respects. You're moving it from poorer Mombasa to wealthy Nairobi. So you're moving the dock workers' jobs from Mombasa to Nairobi. Will these people be able to follow their jobs? I don't think so. I think that's potentially a very politically explosive issue.
So the reason why we're playing that clip of Devin Day in July 2018 is because everything he predicted back then ended up happening in Mombasa. And today the president asked Kenyans to shun negative publicity about the project that he launched today, that is phase 2A of the standard gauge railway from Nairobi to Naivasha for passenger services. So this evening we're asking, are Kenyans being unfair in criticizing this entire project, or is there reason to worry? And that's why we're speaking to Professor Alfred Omenya, who's joining us in our studio. Professor, thank you for joining us on The Big Story this evening. Are Kenyans being unfair looking at the project, especially the one that was launched today, Nairobi to Naivasha?
No, thank you, Linda, for that question. I think the president, the minister, and government functionaries should ask themselves, why did Kenyans react like that? Is this the first project ever being done in this country? No. Why the negativity? The reason why the negativity is there is because this project has never been convincing right from the start. And it fails to be convincing even now. When the minister says that a few of us should be rounded to be taught about SGR in his classroom, this is actually contempt for Kenyans, because we know, we have a right to information in this country. It's a constitutional right. If they do have this convincing information, why isn't that information being made public? But the of more concern to me is public officers peddling lies on camera about these projects. It is very sad that the minister was lying, telling us that SGR has been making money, while actually the SGR accounts were made public. We know that SGR last year made about 9 billion Kenya shillings, about slightly under 8 from freight, and slightly over 1 billion from passenger travels. And we know that the same SGR spent 12 billion. SGR last year reported a loss of about 3.3 billion, actually 3.26 billion. And we have those facts and figures. We know that last year, government of Kenya paid to the Exim Bank 32.6 billion Kenya shillings. It is public knowledge. That is very well known. So where is this money that the minister is talking about, that there was so much profit that part of it is being used to run SGR, the other part is being used to fund the loan, while actually SGR made very serious losses. We know that this year, government is going to pay about 86 billion to Exim Bank for the SGR. And we know for a fact that SGR will not make anything above 15 billion. I mean, if they really are operating very well. So this profitability that the minister is talking about is just a lie. And Linda, of course, the broader concerns with SGR. We know that SGR is the biggest scandal ever in this country. We have the facts and we have the figures, and government has the facts and government has the figures. Government commissioned a number of studies for SGR. Kipra did a study. We had a study by a Chinese firm. We had a study by a Canadian firm. And none of these studies actually showed viability of SGR. This is information that government cannot actually hide from Kenyans. It's a fact that SGR has not been viable, right from the word go. We know that SGR is a totally inflated project cost. We know right from the word go that the initial costs of SGR were increased 400% by government of Kenya, so that SGR in the continent becomes the most expensive railway construction. It doesn't matter whether you are Ethiopia electrifying your train, you'll spend just about 35% of what Kenya is spending. It doesn't matter whether it is people that we perceive to be corrupt in Nigeria, the Lagos-Ibadan line. We know that is actually spending way less, in fact, just about 50%. Of course, for Kenyans to visualize this, Nairobi to Naivasha, let's call it Nairobi to Naivasha, spent 150 billion Kenyan shillings. This was coming to almost 900 million Kenyan shillings per kilometer.
Yeah, and the CS says this is the most profitable, viable project in sub-Saharan Africa.
Let him show us the viability. Let him show us the figures. We are putting figures on the table. And these are facts. They are facts. Where are we going to get the facts from? From the same government and government documents and feasibility from technical studies. We know the cost of construction of rail across the continent. And we know that SGR, in fact, there is no other rail network in the continent that comes to even 60% of the SGR. And government knows that this is the case. There has been the project costs have been totally inflated. We know that it's part of the lack of viability of the SGR that we don't have funds for the Naivasha Kisumu line. It is actually common knowledge. And that's partly why we're going back to refurbishing the meter gauge railway. We know that the study is done by the World Bank.
That should have been option one in the first place.
Exactly. That is what it should have been. But even if it was actually working, I mean, even if we decided to throw all this money and do this project regardless of the costs, the World Bank has actually told us that for SGR to be functional, we need to basically carry about 400% the freight capacity of the entire East African community potential. Is impossible. So even when SGR will be operating at its full capacity, it will still not be viable as a broader rail network.
Okay.
And surely if government was convinced that this is actually working, if government knows that this is profitable, why can't they put those figures on the table? What makes the government makes it so difficult for a government that is required by law, by the Constitution of the Republic of Kenya, to make public such information? What is preventing government from making such information public?
Yeah, I remember my colleague Mark Masai at some point asked for the documents the president promised he was going to make them public. That has not happened. Okay, so Prof, let me pick your mind specifically on what was launched today, Phase 2A, Nairobi to Naivasha. And the CS is agitated because there is a report that called it a railway to nowhere. And he says it's heading somewhere. So what are your thoughts about Nairobi, Naivasha? There are those who are saying, I mean, this thing is taking us nowhere. If I'm leaving in Nairobi, I'm going to Western, then I have to get to Suswa and then get a connecting shuttle, which I would have even taken in Nairobi. Does it make sense?
Of course, it doesn't make sense, and that's why Kenyans are making noises. And the CS also basically told us it doesn't make sense. So we don't know exactly why they were launching it. The CS was very clear that regardless of the passenger traffic that SGR will carry, that SGR will never really make much progress on passengers. So that is token. But in any event, we know that the passenger component of SGR, as was launched today, is viable, and Kenyans have helped break down this to the CS and his people. Basically, what Kenyans are saying is that look, if you're saying this is a mode of transport between Nairobi and Naivasha, then I have to leave Nairobi and go to Mlolongo or go to Ngong, that will take me 1 hour. Then of course, I have to process myself into the train. Then I take another 1 hour or so, and I'm in Suswa. And then from Suswa, I take another 1 or so hours, and I'm in Naivasha. You'll have actually spent about 4 hours trying to get between Nairobi and Naivasha, because you must actually use this government piece of infrastructure. And I don't know how government will force people to use it. I think the reactionary bit of the president is the one we must clutch onto, that this is a piece of transport that will be very useful for the residents of Gong and the residents of Suswa, yeah, because they're also Kenyans, so they can use the SGR for now. Yeah. But otherwise, I mean, of course, it was not viable. I don't know what the hurry was to launch it. Yeah, because as the minister correctly says, not the viability, but actually it would make more sense when when freight is being done, which they're suggesting will happen in December. But even having said that, again, the same studies by the World Bank, the same studies by the Canadians, the same studies by government, basically shows that freight by SGR will still be about 50% more expensive than freight by the road. And of course, I mean, there's still always a tendency to stretch the truth. Yes, about the time that it actually takes. It takes the cargo from from Mombasa to Naivasha. The minister was approximating 3 days. But then the question comes, I mean, if you're using SGR, even currently, how long does it take? Yeah, you must load your cargo in Mombasa, and then you must offload it again and in the ECDs and go through a whole complicated logistical challenges, and in fact you spend more time still.
Listen, there's an article that was written by Professor Peter Kagwanja, who's a former government advisor and currently chief executive of Africa Policy Institute, and he actually said, infrastructure is good for Kenya. It reflects a country on an urgent mission to transform itself from a basically agrarian non-mineral economy to an industrial one supported by modern infrastructure in a situation where tax revenues and other government surpluses are less predictable. So here's the question. Is there anything positive about this SGR project at all?
Linda, actually SGR as a piece of infrastructure is a very positive thing for the country. We're very excited actually when this project was announced. Despite the fact that it was not optimal as far as we are concerned, the priority should have been made in opening the north. The priority should have been made in getting our urban areas more efficient, because we're going to get benefits immediately. But definitely such a significant piece of investment by the country made a lot of sense. Then after actually making the first decision that was tolerable or acceptable, government has continued making very, very bad decisions from that time till now. And one of them is what I was actually suggesting. It's like telling me, Alfred, you need to buy a car because you're moving around and your business will be more efficient. That's a good idea. But then, when eventually you give me the car, you tell me, oh, Alfred, for this Toyota Passo, you're going to pay us, in fact, we bought it for you, and you'll pay us 8 million. That is where the problem came in. That in the first instance, why are we paying 4 times the cost of this piece of infrastructure? And I think that is when Kenyans parted ways with the president. Kenyan parted ways with the government on this particular project. And after that, there's just been bumbling and bumbling and bumbling, saying, okay, fine, we're doing the first phase, insisting this project will be viable initially, even if you don't have Uganda on board. Now the minister is telling us that, yes, I mean, Uganda is on board because of a public statement Uganda made. Is that really how governments transact businesses? Is that what commitment is? Okay. A public statement by President Yoweri Museveni. We know that it's common sense. SGR will only be viable if if you know, the Uganda cargo, the cargo going to DR Congo, the cargo going to Rwanda, Burundi, you know, is actually hauled on the SGR. But then the amount of money we've spent on the infrastructure will still not actually make it viable in the first instance. Yeah, so I think the issue is not that this was a bad piece of infrastructure, but like I've said, it is actually buying for me or buying for that poor Kenyan who basically needs food more, a Mercedes-Benz, and then paying 30 million for it. That could have actually been used to totally transform these people's lives in other ways. We're saying, for example, I mean, looking at our macroeconomic situation now, we're saying it makes a lot more sense to actually revamp the old rail, even as we are thinking of how we'll fund this. We know how much the country is paying in terms of debt. We know the economy is on its knees. Why? It is because of these huge amounts of money that we're borrowing to fund these particular projects, whose benefits actually we are going to realize in a distant future. We need to plan, and we need to meticulously implement our plans.
I need to ask you a final question.
Right.
President Uhuru Kenyatta today was very categorical. He said at the end of his term, he will go home. And this is the president who needs a legacy. He's come up with Big Four agenda, and I know infrastructure is also key as well. So basically, what are we saying? That we have people surrounding the president that are not telling him the truth, that are not sharing the same vision that he has? Because you've just said that the CS is being economical with the truth. Yeah? So where exactly is the problem? Do we have people who are misadvising the president? What's going on?
Yes, definitely. Linda, I think one of the issues that we've had, and I'm very concerned about it, is this thing about legacy and about people around the president pushing legacy. And legacy is being pushed at all costs, whether it makes sense or it doesn't. Legacy is being pushed whether it is part of policy,
saying this is the most profitable
or not. You know, and I think there's a concern, in fact, with the entire Big Four agenda, including this particular piece of infrastructure. How do people realize legacy, honestly? I think the president has surrounded himself with very, very bad advisors, or people who actually misadvise him in the first instance. The president has been elected to run the country and to deliver literally on every single aspect of the country. We expect the country to be run well. The president has not been elected to leave a legacy. This thing called legacy that is measured in SGR. This thing called legacy that is measured in houses that Kenyans don't need. This is total bollocks, is nonsense. The president should run the country well, should implement the plans that he had, including the flagship projects that he had. The president should reduce corruption. The president should leave us in a situation where we have got fiscal and macroeconomic stability that can grow jobs. The president should make sensible decisions, and that is where his legacy will come from. But this whole idea that Kenya exists for the president's legacy, that government exists for the president's legacy, and the president's legacy are projects where people are looting money from the public, I think really we have a problem. The president may actually shoot himself in the foot on this legacy story. Of course, it's nice to leave a legacy, but on the other hand, we must ask ourselves, how have great leaders left legacy? Great leaders have left legacy by offering proper leadership to their countries, not by doing projects that don't make sense and which people are looting.
I hear you. That's a good place to end this conversation. Professor Alfred Omenya, thank you for speaking to us on The Big Story. A big thank you as well to CS James Macharia, Transport CS, who spoke to our lead reporter, Sophia Wanuna. That's why we leave it here on The Big Story. I'm Linda Ogutu.